We've had 6 Prime Ministers, 8 Chancellors, 40 Ministers in the Treasury departments, hundreds of different ministers because of the chaotic political leadership over the last 10 years. If you want to look at how you solve the problem with public services, look at the political chaos that we've had to deal with as well, not just simply headlines around sacking civil servants. The point that we keep making is that the civil service doesn't decide its own size, it's ministers who do that. If you want to do more, you need more civil servants. If you want to do less, you can cut the civil service. This is actually about priorities, and I think that's what's so disappointing about this kind of retreading of these announcements. A month ago, they talked about performance management in the senior civil service. They're talking about performance-related pay. There's been performance-related pay for more than 2 decades in the civil service. The reality is, if you want to reform public services and you want to do that with limited finances, it's about hard choices, and that's really what government faces if they want to improve the civil service and public services.
But, I mean, there's a great piece on this in the Sunday Times today, and one paragraph just really stood out for me. It said 4 times as many people are now working in NHS England and the Department for Health and Social Care than they were in 2010, when waiting times were shortest and patient satisfaction highest. I mean, that's an astounding stat, isn't it? 4 times as many people. You talk about wanting to do more. It sounds like we're doing less.
That's because the government reorganised the NHS and created the NHS England. That was the Andrew Lansley reforms. So government makes these choices, makes these decisions. Government ministers think that's a better way of organising it. If you look at the investment in the NHS, one tiny bit of it is NHS England. Actually, the vast majority of the NHS is out there in hospitals and GP surgeries, and you look at the money that's gone into those services compared to what they did pre-2010, and you can see why services are getting worse. Government is complex. The reasons why it works better are complex. There are complex solutions to that, and the reasons why it doesn't are complex as well. We've had 6 Prime Ministers, 8 Chancellors, 40 Ministers in the Treasury departments, hundreds of different ministers because of the chaotic political leadership over the last 10 years. If you want to look at how you solve the problem with public services, look at the political chaos that we've had to deal with as well, not just simply headlines around sacking civil servants.
Yeah, I mean, I have some sympathy with your position, and of course it's your job to represent the civil service and your members, and we are getting lots of texts in support of what civil servants do. But we have had a text from David who says, I have mixed feelings on Dominic Cummings, but I agreed with his opinion on the civil service. It should be made to run like a business. Underperforming members should be supported to improve, but then managed out if they show an unwillingness to do so. They get a decent pension and very generous sick pay, which is used freely in many cases. We're paying for them, and lots are just clearly picking up their wages. Do you think there is a productivity problem within the civil service which comes from the culture, not from the political strictures imposed upon them?
There's a productivity problem in the civil service and across the public sector and in the private sector as well. Our productivity levels across the economy are below our comparators in the G7.
Well, shouldn't the civil service be leading the way then in working out how to improve productivity?
Of course, absolutely. But the reasons why that is the case are complex, and the solutions are complex. This isn't simply about a few underperforming senior managers in the civil service. We're a trade union. We wouldn't be in business if people weren't sacked for poor performance in the civil service. These myths that emerge, that no one ever gets a sack, what do you think we're doing day in, day out as a trade union representing people? Of course, you can improve performance management in the civil service, but the reality of it is, if you want to improve public services for the people who are listening to this show, that's about the big decisions. Government have got a spending review coming, and they've got to make some hard choices. That's the reality. Focusing on that and not a few headlines, as they've created today, is how you reform public services and improve public services for the taxpayers in this country.
Would you ever support a reduction in the number of people working in the public sector?
Of course, we have always said it's up to government to decide. You can have a bigger civil service, you can have a smaller civil service. Government is elected. It's for them to decide that, not us as a trade union or the civil service itself. The civil service doesn't recruit its own people. It gets told by government how much money it's got. But government has to own that. If you want a smaller civil service and a smaller state, you have to say what the consequences of that are. So we've had ministers talking about wanting a smaller civil service and then adding workload and adding new work onto the civil service, and that's why the numbers have gone up.
Okay, so if you accept it as... I'm sorry to interrupt, but if you accept it as a hypothetical, do you accept that now there are too many people in the civil service. It is unwieldy, and we do not have the finances as a country to continue funding it in the way that we are.
It's not about whether there are too many or too little. What does the government want to do? If the government wants to do a lot and needs a lot of public servants to do it, the vast majority of what public servants do are people-facing roles. That's what they do. The highest number of civil servants that have been recruited, the big increase that everyone's talking about, are in prisons. Prison officers are civil servants. Are you saying you want to cut them? Then you look at border guards. Do you want to cut them? Are we cutting the border guards when we've increased the challenge?
What about cutting the managers and not the frontline staff?
That's what every government has been saying for 15 years. That's what it's. If you're serious about reforming public services, you need more than anecdotes. You need hard choices. The size of the civil service is up to ministers, but the consequences of that are also up to ministers. The idea that you can simply get more for less is rhetoric. It's a headline. It's not reality. You have to demonstrate how you do that.